Welcome to part 11 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up and corruption that ensued. A-list celebrities, politicians, their offspring, all that stuff. So today we're at the very end of the preliminary hearing. We're in the closing statements. We're finally done. This is about a year since the assaults happened. So now closing statements. So Robert Shapiro starts off. And this is just something I forgot that was in the transcript that I just wanted to read out to you guys because birds of a feather. But, I tried to post something, screenshots of tweets that I found of Sean Drizz's, like, right before the attack happened. And he uses the N-word freely, publicly. This, kid from Beverly Hills High School. But so I noticed in the transcript, in the closing statements, that Robert Shapiro actually said, when he was talking about the photo lineup that the witnesses had to use right after the attacks to identify who attacked who, and I quote, he says, "So you have an elderly Caucasian with no facial hair whatsoever, and then a gallery of 5 other people who look like hoodlums. What's the opposite of an elderly Caucasian with no facial hair?" I'm just wondering what he calls hoodlums and why. So when he doesn't know, he's just looking at pictures. Anyways, so then Shapiro then continues to lie on the record, and he says, Ann says the fence is about 4.5 feet tall. I have never said that in my life. He then says, we know it's 6.5 feet tall. I went back and I measured it like a year after the criminal trial. I measured it. I have the video. It's exactly 6 feet tall. So again, all these really rich law firms that if you're going to go to them for help, just remember they can't afford measuring tape. So then Sean Drizz's attorney, he gets up and he's doing his closing statement and he opens with, Ann lied. The fence is 6.5 feet tall. Like, does anybody tell the truth here? This is crazy. So anyway, so that was that. Let me get to the next part. At one point, Thomas Mesereau, who is the attorney for Alberto Daniel Driz, he gets up and he actually tries to say something about Maurice Driz, the other twin. He says, it stands to reason that if Mr. Maurice Driz was beaten this badly at his age, given the way he was dressed, no history of any criminal report, which is interesting because what you guys don't know yet, and I'm going to get into detail later, that at the time of the criminal trial in 2016, that the twins, Maurice and Alberto Driz, were both under investigation and then found guilty of schmexual battery of an underage girl. Both twins. Yeah, you can look it up. They were ordered to pay $500,000 to her, and I don't think they paid her, but we can get to that, and we'll make sure she gets paid. So literally saying they're not under any criminal investigations except for little girls, I guess. So we're just gonna pretend that didn't happen. So we get through all that. And then so now let's move on to the DDA. The DDA gets up, Deputy District Attorney. He gets up, he gives a case summary, all that stuff. And he, mentions how bad, I also want to mention one last thing that Thomas Mesereau, the attorney, said, that he was referring to those, injury pictures that the Drizzes submitted, and he described it as, it's unalterably true that Maurice Driz was pounded to a pulp. His face was beaten to a pulp. He's in bed. His eyes are swollen. He has swollen cheeks. Redness all over his face. Did anybody else see those pictures of the little paper cut with the Flintstone Band-Aid? Yeah, it was harrowing. I'm still traumatized. It was really hard to look at. So we get into the DDA. Sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit. I just want to get this out. The DDA does a case summary. How much time? Okay. And we're going over all the counts and all that stuff. And he's talking about how much, oh God, I can't swear, how much stuff has been laid out by the defense. So he even says, and I quote, because these are things we didn't know because we weren't present in the courtroom when each person was testifying and stuff. But the DDA said to the court, in fact, the person who was able to distinguish Alberto and Maurice Driz, twins, despite them switching chairs, switching glasses, switching suits, switching ties, and then he goes on and on. I forgot that they were switching ties and suits, but I did have written down that one of them one day was wearing a bright green and purple tie, and then the other one would wear a cashmere V-neck sweater. Very different outfits, so that if you switched them, they're just very particular. You can't mistake them. So that was a little wild. That was a little wild, rereading as I was rereading it this morning and going, they switched suits and ties too? Of course they did. So then we get into the counts. There was 6 counts, and 1 through 6. So 1 was like the not so serious violent felonies. Counts 2 through 5 were GBI, great bodily injury felonies. And 6 is a serious felony as well. And that was just Sean Driz because he threatened to unalive somebody who was trying to save my life. So here are the counts. Alberto had counts 1, 3, 4, and 5. Maurice had 1, 3, 4, and 5. And Sean Driz had 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So those are the counts. And then we're just going to cover one last little thing, which is really interesting, which we didn't know again until I bought the transcripts and found all this. So I want to just say something. The amazing, amazing Judge Michael E. Pastor, who was there for the chair switching, the suit switching, the lies, the aggressiveness towards me on the stand, all of it. He saw all that, he just saw all of this inappropriate stuff happening. So he's going to be amazing for sentencing, right? Because nothing gets by this guy. He's awesome. And he says, during closing statements after they're done, the judge says, "Let me indicate I find the conduct of each defendant in this case extraordinarily violent and dangerous and a threat to public safety." The Shrivers and the Schwarzeneggers didn't think so because of the support, the private support that I uncovered over all these years. They didn't think so. They didn't think my life was worth enough to be protected, and they don't think any of your lives are worth being protected as long as their daughter's girlfriend gets to go on yacht trips with them every year. Yes, I have pictures. We're going to get to that too. So then the judge says, okay, now first off, when they were first arrested they were arrested, remember I said Shapiro brought them all down to the LAPD when we were there, and it was like they were in and out in an hour for GBI felonies. This is insane. And the judge was like, how did that happen? And why was their bail made for 30 grand? Because you have to pay 10% of your bail. So 3 grand each is what they had to pay. And that's extraordinarily and unprecedentedly low for violent felonies like this, for attempted unaliving. This is not a thing that happens. So he asked about it. And Shapiro interjects, and Shapiro goes, well, I personally drove them down instantaneously to the Venice Police Department and surrendered 3 of them. I think that was a basis on which the magistrate at the arraignment decided to keep the bail at the $30,000 limit. I have a question for everybody that has a black friend, a person of color friend, who's ever gotten in trouble with a felony. Have they ever gotten a lower bail, the lowest possible bail, because a well-to-do, famous, rich attorney said, I drove him down here? Is that a thing that happens? Because if it is, then I might be wrong and angry for the wrong reasons. But if it's a thing, let me know. I'd love to know if there's a precedent for that. So then he says that, and this is interesting. The DDA then says, where'd it go? Okay, sorry. So the DDA then says, this is interesting because he was cut out of these proceedings. He wasn't even told or allowed to be at these initial proceedings, right? Like when they got arrested and stuff. He says, I was not at the initial arraignment. If I had been, I would have actually asked for statutory bail. When I got assigned after, I was advised by the court that they'd already rendered it at $30,000, and I was never really given an explanation on how that occurred. Interesting, right? They were immediately released. They were allowed to not have a DA in the room. They just kind of did it all themselves, a little hustle. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop there, and then I always say I'm going to film another one and get it out next, but I'm going to try to do it today. We'll see. I just kind of go fetal after these. So, okay, so we're done with sentencing, and the next several parts, I don't even know, 4, 5, 6 parts, I'm just going to use just to talk about all of their felony probation violation hearings and all of the 0 prison time that they all got for those. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting. I'm going to keep them coming.